So hello, welcome to my talk. I'm Chris. Nice to see you all. Today I'm talking about how to do open source, basically. Rules to keep you sane in an open source world. Because, like it or not, open source is different than a lot of people's business and corporate experience. So I've been in open source a really long time. I did the math for this talk, 27 years, using, building, and distributing open source software. I make mistakes in people's public facing code bases. So it's always fun. Get to learn new things. Made a ton of friends in open source, and I've been fortunate enough to work with several companies over my time in open source. So I've done this a lot. I've taught people, marketers that don't know anything about open source, how to do open source software the right way. So I figured I'd share that knowledge here at All Things Open. So in the past, I share the QR code to the slides for accessibility, essentially. I don't trust myself to make an accessible PDF, but I do trust myself so that somebody can use Google Slides with a screen reader. So you can follow along with us as we talk. All right, so let's get some terms out of the way. First up, who's heard the terms upstream, downstream? Anybody? Okay. Mind if I ask a question? What is upstream? Without looking. Yeah, go ahead.
The origin project.
Yes. So upstream, things like Fedora, things like CentOS Stream, things like, well, even the Linux kernel has an upstream and a downstream version of it amongst many distributions. But normally when I think of upstream, I think of it as like the source. So that's where the source code for the thing that I'm going to then modify and redistribute as necessary as either part of another project or part of a product. So there's always an upstream and a downstream. Just keep that in mind. Downstream things are the products that come from taking that thing, adding patches, UI, UX improvements, those kinds of things. So downstream is typically part of the project that the upstream is doing is packaged up in downstream. And then it can be sold as a product, or it could be sold or presented as just another form of open source software. If you look at Kubernetes, for example, there's a lot of open source stuff in that entire stack of things. So Kubernetes is technically an upstream, but it could also be a downstream if you're looking at like the kernel, for example. So the Linux kernel is one of the best examples I can give of an open source project. Who in here has heard of Open Source Initiative? Okay, cool, great. They basically created the definition for open source and what makes up open source. They also handle like, hey, is this license in compliance with the open source definition, which is 10 things. I don't know all of them. That's why I linked to them. But the idea is that there's this organization out there that says yay or nay, and they have lawyers that work on staff, and they work with the community members to actually get new licenses approved or disapproved as open source. Who's heard of Apache? Not the web server, the software foundation. Probably no one's heard of Apache, the web server here, if you've only been in tech for like 10 years or so. So yeah, Apache started as, I think, the web server. The foundation came along later, maybe, if I remember that correctly. Don't hold me to that. Free software. Who has heard of the GNU public license? The Free Software Foundation made that license, which was then approved by OSI. So now we all use the Linux kernel in any number of things, from our phones to our smart TVs to you name it. If you modify something in GPL, or general public license code, are you required to redistribute it? Yes, no, you're not required, but if you're going to distribute it in any form or fashion, you have to include your modifications along with the original source code so that others can pick it up and distribute it as they see fit. It's an interesting licensing scheme. Essentially, free software has all these licenses: GPL, LGPL, AGPL, version 2, version 3. Version 1 is gone, thankfully. But those licenses carry some responsibilities when you're redistributing that code. And then who hasn't heard of the Linux Foundation? So it's, okay, great, awesome. They're, I like to consider them like they're a non-profit, or not a non-profit. They are more of a trade organization as opposed to a non-profit. What they do is create smaller sub-projects or sub-foundations, for lack of a better term, that include, all the people from a certain community. So like the Cloud Native Computing Foundation is the foundation that holds all the IP and trademarks and everything else for Kubernetes. CNCF is actually part of the Linux Foundation. So think of them as the foundation makers of the world. They have a lot of open source foundations under them. I do not have a count. It's changing every day, it feels like, too. So what is open source? The OSI has a license review process. Includes, legal professionals when it comes to intellectual property law, copyrights, as well as industry experts. I have a friend that is part of the team that, helps say a license is open source or not, and, does the rigorous work to make that happen. There's tons of open source licenses. You can go to opensource.org. There's hundreds of open source licenses. I'm sure you can find one that meets your needs there, whatever they are, unless you're not doing open source. So best thing I can ask is, like, if you ever have a question about how to release something, is to talk to your compliance, or if you're lucky enough to have an open source program office, talk to them. They will have opinions. So the different licenses grant different freedoms or restrict them depending upon the wording. So choose wisely. There's a few we'll touch on here, the more popular ones, the more widely used ones. I can't talk about open source without talking about free software, which is kind of different. So there's permissive licensing, and then there's reciprocal licensing, or what they call copyleft. We'll get into that in a second, but the GNU GPL was created by the Free Software Foundation so that they can build an entire operating system and all the tools necessary as something that is completely open source and free and redistributable, and requires redistribution with the original source code. If you have ever used Linux, you have used a piece of code that is under the GPL. If you've ever made a product out of something that is the GPL, you then have to release it as open source, because that's what the license says. You have to redistribute this along with the original code and your modifications. So that has to go out to the world, essentially. So the license is interesting in the fact that it helps perpetuate the same free software community in terms of, hey, this software is now something I can use freely, and there's no cost or obligation for consumption. There is some obligations for redistributing anything under a certain license. So just keep that in mind. And obviously the GNU public license family is all OSI approved. So popular free software, like I said, the Linux kernel, if you've used Ansible or VLC, the compiler, GCC, Git, that's all licensed under a GPL, which keeps it nice and open and free, and no one person really controls it unless you're Linus. So yeah, let's talk about the two kinds of licenses. So the APLs, the GPLs, the MPLs, those are considered weak or strong copyleft, right? The GPL is more strong copyleft, as in this will perpetuate throughout anything. Any modifications you make, you have to distribute them, you have to share them, and even linking, depending upon how you link to it, that could flag a certain need for the license as well. Some things you can statically link, some things you need to link dynamically to actually be in compliance with the license. But this isn't a talk about licenses. So think of it as copyleft or reciprocal, in that the people need to reciprocate the licensing model, or as permissive in terms of like the MIT license, the BSD license family, the Apache 2 license. Those are all considered permissive in that you don't have to necessarily take the code and your modifications and distribute them all freely. That's not required. You can do that, but it's not required. That's the biggest thing when it comes to licensing. So I always have to include this slide in any open source talk. Open source is not a business. That used to be very important 10 years ago. Not so much anymore. People are starting to understand that now. Just doing something open source does not guarantee business success. Those are two very different things. Just keep that in mind. Okay, so let's talk about working in open source a little bit. I always like to say, up front, don't take yourself too seriously, right? Like, yes, the thing you are doing is very important, but what you are doing might not be important to the open source project you're trying to work with. So that's how you build context, essentially, is making sure that folks know what you're doing so you can help the project and the project can help you do that. Not always cut and dry, but that's a good way to think about it. Feedback. You get a lot of feedback in open source, a lot. Some of it could be, negative. Some of it could be positive, but just remember it's feedback. Don't take it personally, right? That's the biggest thing. When someone questions something you've learned through pain and suffering and hard work, yes, it's human nature to push back, but their pain, their suffering, their experiences are what led to them asking you to change something. Just keep that in mind, right? Like there's a two-way street of learned, shared experiences. It's an opportunity to improve yourself and your work. So use that feedback wisely. And it's a gift. Believe it or not, having somebody review your code is a gift, because chances are, if it's all open source, they're not getting paid to do that. They're doing that of their own free will. Staying grounded in the here and now is something I like to tell folks, right? Like, don't worry about in 5 years from now. Worry about the thing you're trying to tackle today. And if there's a series of events that need to happen for you to be able to tackle that, then break them down. And as always, with any open source project, community over product or company is something you will see, I know in the Kubernetes space, you see that a lot, because many, many, many companies have things based on Kubernetes or work with Kubernetes that are all open source, but they also make products out of them, which is totally fine. When you're working in the community, you need to put that community hat on and think with those community values versus corporate values or any other values in life. So like I said, in the Kubernetes community, it's actually even baked into our community values. So go to kubernetes.dev community/values, and it's in there. So there's many open source projects that hold this mantra. Just keep that in mind. It literally is a different hat that you wear. Let me give you an example of open source going wrong and somebody taking themselves too seriously. So before I worked at Amazon, there was somebody in the Amazon Web Services Ether team was using Claire, which is an open source container scanning tool. Red Hat, I think, released it originally. No, it was CoreOS, which was then acquired by Red Hat, and it's still open source, and it's very much commercialized by Red Hat, which is great. The Claire community announced something was going to change. They put it out on mailing lists. They shared it wherever they could. The whole world was supposed to know about it. It was a breaking change, so that's why they informed people ahead of the change. But that change broke something in some unknown or not widely consumed AWS product pipeline. So Claire was included as part of the tooling. Some user flag changed or something was added that you needed to, modify to have Claire scan your containers in the ACI/CD pipeline, and a very, very prominent AWS customer. They have commercials that talk about what's in your wallet. I'll just say that. They were asking for something to be done that included Claire, and that got delayed due to the need for this fix that was communicated in advance, but AWS didn't pick up on. So, if you've never worked with anybody at Amazon, they're a different beast. They are very customer obsessed. It's one of their values, and that's great. But the problem is, when you're in open source, the customer is literally everyone. So there's some responsibility of sharing of, hey, by the way, we're releasing this breaking change, like they did their part, but for whatever reason, no one touched Claire in this one pipeline, and thus it broke. They actually picked up the phone, a product manager on the AWS team, and literally chewed out an engineer at Red Hat for implementing the breaking change as they scheduled to do it. Which is not the right way to do open source in any way, shape, or form. You need to be actively involved. You need to be on the mailing list. You need to be aware of the communications coming out of that open source project. Work upstream so that your downstream products and services are not impacted negatively, but are even better, you can contribute back and make the project better for people like you that are doing the same things. That's kind of the idea. A for-profit company complaining to an open source project is not how you do open source. And you'll see that over and over again in the world, sadly. It's because of the paradigm between businesses and open source. It's very much a apples and oranges kind of comparison. All right, be humble, be open, be honest. You would think being open and honest would be part of open source, but I have to tell people that. So just going to throw that out there. Like all things, people try to game the system, right? So learn from others, have an open mind about that, right? Like someone's been there longer than you, take their feedback and, use that feedback. Oh, geez, sorry. Supposedly I have do not disturb on. Never make an assumption like you should always check. And when I say check, that could mean check issues, check the knowledge base, check pull requests, check the code base itself. You can go find the why behind almost every line of code being added to the project, because hopefully there's pull requests, merge requests, depending upon which tool you're using. I think there's more other kinds of requests now. Always assume positive intent. Always be friendly. Like these are things that are necessary to do like really good work. Disagreements are normal. Passionate debate should be expected because there's a reason why the things they are the way they are. And, it's a two-way street, that whole I'm doing this way, you're doing it that way. Maybe both of you could learn something from the experience. Just keep that in mind. Welcome newcomers. So, hey, welcome everyone to open source. If no one said welcome before, I am the person that can welcome you. Be very open and honest, right? Like you don't need to ask questions in like a DM with somebody you trust unless it's like a security thing, right? Do it in the open so everyone else can benefit from it. Be that in a forum, Slack, Discord, insert chat tool here, just make sure you're doing it in the public. And always share what you learn with others. Having more than 2 people familiar with things prevents bottlenecks, it prevents single points of failure, and enables very important contributors to take vacations, which we all deserve and kind of need in this life. So sharing things, documenting things, how-tos, those guides, the whole 9 yards are all necessary parts. So feel free to share them. I think the biggest example of folks sharing knowledge is like right before any like the ones that I see on a regular basis in my role in the Kubernetes community are very much the release blogs from people that don't have a Kubernetes domain, right? Like all the Kubernetes vendor products tend to do some kind of release announcement if they have a feature that changes the way you use the product. And they include everything because that's all open source. And it's all licensed under Apache, which is awesome. So there's no obligation to share things outside of how you distribute it. So everyone has agenda, and that's usually okay until it isn't. Show of hands. Who contributes to an open source community? Oh, awesome. Can I ask you, or anyone for that matter, why do you contribute to an open source community? Go ahead.
I run the tests that are in the open source projects.
Okay.
A lot of them were busted, so I just fixed them.
Fixing tests. But why are you fixing the tests?
Because I'm the one using them.
Because you're the one using them. Okay, interesting. All right, cool. People contribute to projects for different reasons. I've worked on a project because work needed me to do something like package an RPM out of HA proxy, for example. It's a necessary thing that some companies need. You know, at work, I've done things, very much have helped document or fix things so that I could use them. I've contributed to things that have, you know, helped me personally and my career. And that was the reason why, right? Like, if you share, everyone has a reason for, you know, starting to contribute. If you share that, people will help you continue contributing. And they'll help you find your way in a project, right? Like, hey, I'm after this one feature, this one thing. Great. They will send you the right direction to get you what you need. If you're just, I want to give back, I've used this project for a long time, I figured I could help somehow, that's also totally fine. And people will ask you what you're passionate about or the things you do and, you know, as part of your job and how that applies to the project. So be open with folks about why you're there so they can help you find the right place to do that thing. Anyone heard the term co-opetition? Very normal in open source. Red Hat, Ubuntu, everyone. They all contribute back to the Linux kernel, but they all have their own products and, you know, downstream projects and so forth, so on. That's what we call co-opetition. It's all these companies working together. If you've ever worked at Red Hat, you probably know that their relationship with Oracle is bad. But yeah, when I worked at Red Hat, I worked with people at Oracle because they were all working in open source along with me. And the walls of the companies and the policies and everything else start crumbling down. Like the teams I was on at AWS, I worked upstream with literally every company AWS told us never to talk to. So that gives you an idea of what co-opetition really is. We're all doing this to benefit a larger group of companies or people or users for that matter. Just remember that community over product is, or community over company is always how those teams should operate. So if Red Hat comes up with a really novel feature, but the Linux kernel team wants it done differently, Red Hat might say, okay, fine, we'll release it as a different thing and create another open source project out of it. And that's totally normal too. Doesn't mean that's the way to do something, right? There's always a different way to do everything. You know, I always say, like, share why you're there because it will help you find people with shared goals. So I've started in documentation inside projects and moved on to other roles inside projects. I'm now leading an entire Kubernetes sub-project because I was interested in giving back and helping the Kubernetes community expand, essentially. So it's natural. It takes all kinds of people to do open source. So even if you're just really good at video, that skill would be appreciated by a many number of projects, right? Oh, great, you know DaVinci Studio inside and out. I'm sure that project would really benefit from your skills. It's just finding the right way to contribute them. So always share those goals. And when you're doing code reviews, make sure you review them objectively and subjectively. If there's a style guide from the project that is subjective and hopefully is reflected in any commit or pull request you make, even blog posts for that matter, get reviewed by somebody at some point. So there's always a chance that you will find something and it's maybe not the most efficient way to do it. So feel free to contribute more efficient ways to do it if you see something. Subjective reviews express opinions or feelings, like, hey, I wouldn't have done this way, but go ahead. You use 4 spaces for a tab, I use the actual tab, that's fine. Like, unless there's a style guide that tells you to do something different, it's free game, essentially. So yeah, focus on correctness, focus on the action that you actually want to have happen when communicating with somebody about a code review, right? Like the objective of this 10-line stanza is to do X. So just put that out there because that's what matters, right? Like, what are you actually trying to accomplish? And if somebody can think of a better way to do that, awesome. Take that feedback and run with it. And never disguise your goals or your agendas, because gatekeeping, fiefdoms, and cliques are basically poison to open source communities. So if you're adding a new feature, but you're very selective about who you work with, that's not exactly the most open way to do things. So be open and honest about what you're trying to achieve, and the community will help you achieve that if they're interested. So yeah. Also, you represent yourself in open source to some extent. You can also represent your company to some extent. So just remember, which side of the fence you're on as you're contributing. Some people contribute 100% independent of where they work, and they don't want those two identities to ever overlap either. So they do it under an anonymous name or something to that effect, and that's totally fine, because maybe their employer doesn't want them contributing to open source for who knows why. But both can be true at the same time. You can represent your company and yourself in open source. You can give your entire company a bad name if you're not careful. So just work within the confines of the project and their policies and rules and style guides and everything else. Curiosity will often help more than just you learn how to do something. So be curious, feel free to ask questions. Everyone has a certain way they do things. This is why style guides are important. The way I write a git commit message might not be the same as how you write a git commit message, and that's okay. Meet the community where they are and follow their guides, and use their expectations. And if there is no guide, don't be afraid to create one. If you're nitpicking things like line length or grammar, you may be spending too much time in code reviews and not enough on documentation. That's a good lesson learned there, right? Like, if you expect commits to be written a certain way, then there should be a guide on how to write those commits. And if there isn't, that can be a contribution in and of itself, is just writing that guide. Consider the possible alternatives, right? Like, they could be positive, they could be negative, but they are alternative ways to do almost everything in computing. So just keep that in mind and be open and honest with that feedback.